Good morning, everyone. Now, before we jump into assessing the complaint, let's talk a little bit about, well, why do I need to invest a complaint? Why am I even here? First of all, you may be required by law to invest a complaint. California law does place a duty on employers to investigate misconduct and take remedial action to prevent further discrimination or harassment from occurring in the workplace. If your company ends up being involved in litigation, the investigation can become a key piece of evidence in providing a defense. And we'll talk later about why that's very important, because you will need to document this investigation. Now, investigations can also help your company identify a problem before it becomes a widespread issue. For example, let's say you have an employee that tells you they overheard another employee using inappropriate language, but it wasn't that big of a deal. It was a small offhanded comment. They didn't think it was intentional, but they reported it anyways. Now, if you conduct an investigation and you find, yes, it was unintentional, it was an offhanded comment, maybe you conclude that there's no disciplinary action needed, but maybe some additional training for your employees might be beneficial. That additional training can educate that employee as well as other employees on what is and isn't appropriate in the workplace, and could potentially prevent another incident from occurring. It could also prevent that incident from turning into 3, 4, 5 incidents and turning into a bigger investigation and a bigger violation. Finally, conducting investigations and taking employee concerns seriously can help you maintain a safe and positive workplace. If an employee is confident that the employer is going to take their concerns seriously, they're more likely to raise smaller concerns before they become a larger problem, like in that example. So now that you've decided, great, I'm going to conduct this investigation, I need to do it, you need to figure out what are my goals here. Some of these goals could include identifying the complaint, identifying what the complaint actually is, who the complainant is, conducting a prompt, fair, and thorough investigation, identifying the problematic behavior, making some recommendations for corrective action that is fair and reasonably calculated to end that problematic behavior. And as I said earlier, that could range from additional training. It may be additional training for everybody. You may decide just our supervisors need additional training, or it may lead to something more serious as termination or written disciplinary action. And again, as we talked about, you can identify and implement any company-wide changes that may need to be made. You may realize your policies are outdated, that you need to revise and update some of these policies. Maybe the policy wasn't as clear as it could be. Maybe it doesn't have a clear reporting structure. The complainant wasn't sure who they're supposed to be reporting the concern to. So all of these things can come up during an investigation, and it really helps the company clean up some of these policies and make sure that we are following the law. Now, through this presentation, you'll receive some tips and suggestions to help you avoid some of the common mistakes that occur in workplace investigations. If an employer ignores or writes off a seemingly minor complaint, it could result in a larger issue and ultimately create a bigger problem for the company. Delaying an investigation may cause the complainant to become restless and feel that their concerns are not being taken seriously. Failing to plan for an investigation can lead to an unorganized and incomplete investigation. Losing objectivity during an investigation may result in a biased result. An investigator who is distracted during interviews, doesn't follow up with interviewees, or uses overly aggressive interview tactics may not be able to get all of the information necessary from the interviewee, and they may only get a partial view of what actually occurred. Finally, an investigation should have a conclusion. Again, that conclusion is not always whether the complainant is right or wrong. There could be some facts that support their allegation, but not enough to support a decision to discipline the alleged wrongdoer. When conducting an investigation, there are many do's and don'ts that the investigator wants to keep in mind. We want to begin investigating promptly. You need to have a neutral investigator, and we'll discuss tips on how to select an investigator shortly. When the complaint comes in, the immediate task should be to identify the who, what, where, when, how of the complaint. The investigator and parties involved should aim to maintain confidentiality, of course, to the extent possible. And the company should have protocols in place for complaints, and those protocols should be followed. If the protocol is to do X, Y, and Z, it is important that the company does follow those protocols and that the investigator as well as the other individuals involved are following those protocols. Something important to keep in mind is to be sure that that you're warning about retaliation against the complainant. It's also important to follow up with the complainant. The complainant may or may not need to be informed about each detail, but the employer should ensure that the complainant is aware of the investigation and that a resolution was reached. Finally, and again, preserving evidence is key. Documentation is so important. It can become a big part of your defense. It can help your case if it ends up in litigation. It's your proof that you conducted a thorough, prompt, fair investigation. Some things to avoid when you're faced with a complaint is to brush off the complainant because it just seems like the employee's whining, or because this is their third, fourth, fifth complaint this month or this week. It's important to get to the bottom of that, to figure out what is going on and to take that complaint seriously. You don't want to retaliate against the complainant, the alleged wrongdoer, or potential witnesses. And finally, you don't want to make assumptions about the complainant or alleged wrongdoer. When conducting an investigation, you want to be unbiased. So you want to be sure that you're not coming into the investigation with preconceived notions. Even if this is the complainant's third complaint this month, it's important to take each complaint seriously. And that may be a factor, but it's not a reason to make an assumption.